Today we're here for the Water Forum, Water Wars, Warriors, and Climate Change. It's a pleasure to moderate such a knowledgeable panel today. They're going to be providing diverse perspectives on the challenges that we face with water resources in California. Clean and plentiful water provides the foundation for prosperous communities, for productive agriculture, for thriving ecosystems. We rely on clean water to survive, yet we now face multiple water challenges. Changing climate patterns are leading us to have to rethink how water is managed. Key sources that we tap for drinking water are being overdrawn, they're being polluted. The biodiversity that makes ecosystems resilient to changes such as drought and climate change is declining from habitat destruction, invasive species, pollution, and more. There are vastly differing views on how water should be managed and allocated amongst the diverse stakeholders in the state. News headlines throughout the state often mention the words water wars. While we are in the midst of the worst drought in 30 years, these are not new issues for California. Water has divided Californians since Mark Twain said that whiskey's for drinking, water's for fighting. I'm hoping that we don't have any fights today, that we have some civil discourse. But as we head into spring, we have the major irrigation season. Rainfall totals, snowpack, reservoir storage, and groundwater levels are all low. Although most larger urban areas have relatively secure water supplies, some smaller isolated communities are bracing for problems, and California is dealing with significant painful choices on agricultural land, environmental flows, and more. These are all topics that our panel is going to touch on today.
And the point of the slide is that sea level's been rising for thousands of years. Here's a record of the last 100 years of sea level rise. San Francisco, sea level has risen 10 inches in the last 100 years. So if you're the exporters, if you're the Department of Water Resources or the Bureau of Reclamation trying to get water to Southern California and San Joaquin Valley, and you need to get water to Clifton Court Forebay, and sea level is rising, this is your future. That X2 location is going to move east, and there is nothing you can do to stop it. And when that mixing zone gets far enough east and contaminates your water supply, you will have lost your investment. So all of the money spent to build all the reservoirs in Northern California, Shasta, Trinity, Oroville, and Folsom, which were mainly paid for by the export interests in Southern California, you're going to lose all of your assets. So what do? The answer is you build the Bay Delta Conservation Plan. Here's Clifton Court Forebay down in the south corner, and here are the 30-foot twin tunnels up with intakes on the Sacramento River just below the city of Sacramento. It's a marvelous plan, it really is. It's actually, I think, quite necessary in the end. You're going to take your intakes and move them safely away from sea level rise and out of the area that's heavily under the influence of endangered species. There's only one little problem. And that is, at this point, there's no proposed resolution of the conflict between the salinity changes in the Delta and the Endangered Species Act issues and what that does for us in Northern California. So the BDCP has assumed that sea level is going to rise 17 inches by 2060, but that all of the existing Delta water quality requirements are going to remain exactly the same as they are. So that X2 mixing zone, that's actually a Delta water quality requirement. And so they're assuming that even though the ocean is going to be 17 inches higher, that X2 location has to be maintained exactly where it is today. So here's Folsom Reservoir. Try to bring it home. Folsom Reservoir is operated by the Bureau of Reclamation, and the most remarkable thing is that it's rather small in comparison to the drainage basin. So it's right at about 1 million acre feet, but the average inflow is 2.6 million acre feet. So it's a challenge for the Bureau every year to, on the one hand, have enough empty space in the reservoir that if we get a flood, that it can manage the flood flows and not inundate the city of Sacramento. And on the other hand, they have to keep enough water in the reservoir to where if it's a drought, they have enough to be able to meet the consumptive needs of the region and provide at least minimum acceptable flows in the river for the aquatic habitat. And the Bureau has a real challenge doing this. Every year they struggle with the right mix, and sometimes they hedge their bets a bit. But if you add on to the responsibility of Folsom to try to hold back the ocean and keep that X2 in its current location, this is what you get. And Paul showed this too, but he neglected to spend a lot of time on the corner of this chart. This is Dept. This is Folsom Lake at 95,000 acre-feet, which happens to be the level of the outlet that serves the city of Folsom, the city of Roseville, and San Juan Water District. 500,000 people depend on water being above 95,000 acre-feet in Folsom Lake, or they don't get a water supply. And what this chart shows is that about 12% of the time, 1 year out of 8 or 9, that Folsom Reservoir will be at Dept by the end of September, along with Folsom Lake, or excuse me, Shasta as well. This is the current plan. This is the current plan. We just don't happen to think that it's a very good plan, and we have a problem with that. This is what it looked like when it was down to 160,000 acre-feet earlier this year in late January. This is the backside of Folsom Dam. Anyway, so what they did is, this is a major project that's being funded by the exporters. They've spent $250 million, and they got to decide what the objective was. And the objective of this project is to protect the exports from rising sea level. All the stuff about habitat conservation, the Delta, I mean, that's all good stuff. That's what they have to do in order to show that there's going to be a benefit, they hope, and be able to build the project. But to make no mistake, this is about protecting the exports and their assets in Northern California from rising sea level. And the problem is that they should have set the objectives to identify a statewide solution to rising sea level, not just Southern California's solution to rising sea level. I was hoping that you could imagine that you're an environmental scientist and you're working for the Department of Water Resources, and you feed all of your information into the modeling, and the results come out, and this is the results. And you look at this and you go, oh my goodness, this is bad. You know, this, who's going to live in houses that don't have running water for months at a time? You know, what's going to happen to the jobs at businesses that don't have running water? What's going to happen to the environment of the American Sacramento River if Folsom and Shasta are empty and there's no water running in the river? This is bad. Is there an alternative to this? How do we not get here? And the answer is that it's the assumption that all of the existing environmental requirements that exist currently are going to be maintained in a future state where sea level is 17 inches higher and climate change has changed our precipitation patterns. And so yes, there's an alternative to this. You could assume instead that the resource agencies and the State Water Resource Control Board would modify their environmental objectives, that they would adapt to rising sea level and change the environmental objectives so that this didn't happen. And so you're a young scientist and you're evaluating, should we assume that all the requirements stay the same, or should we assume that they're going to change in the future and we're not going to drain these reservoirs dry? And those people who sat at that table and made that decision decided it was easier to propose economic and ecological disaster for Northern California than it was to assume that the environmental regulations of the state could adapt. It should anticipate drought every year. You can't know, and you need to be prepared for it, right? You need to set carryover storage levels that are high enough so that you can meet the contractual requirements you've got. You can provide minimum beneficial in-stream flows in the river, and you can provide minimum, like 75% of your contract deliveries to your municipal and industrial water providers. And so it kind of looks like this. What we propose is a minor modification. We didn't have to be there just because it was the third driest year. We got there because of the operating plan that the Bureau of Reclamation had. And so if instead of the higher flows they'd held a little bit lower flows for export during the summer, they could have hit the end of September with 450,000 acre-feet in the reservoir, and that's enough water to provide 800 CFS for the entire winter and summer. Again, 80% of optimal for the environment, and met 75% of the consumptive demand for the municipality and industrial users, and ended the year with 200,000 acre-feet. We think that this is a reasonable plan. They just need to increase the carryover storage at the end of September a bit in order to provide for the fact that it might be a drought next year. So then regulatory reform, back into the Delta. The Delta is a very difficult place. It's a major supply of water to Southern California that you cannot deny. We're not going to cut off the water supply to Southern California, for goodness sakes. It's a working landscape that has challenges with islands that are 15 to 20 feet below sea level, and it's a thriving ecosystem that has to be protected. And coming up with a regulatory structure that adapts to periodic drought and rising sea level and protects those interests is going to be a huge challenge for this state. So then there's the local piece. The local piece has got several sort of sub-pieces. Number one, of course, we have to have conservation. We need more storage in this state. We haven't built a reservoir, a major reservoir, since 1960. Actually, that's on-stream reservoir. They've built reservoirs in Southern California. We need to diversify our water supply. Almost all of the Sacramento region is currently served off the American River. And one of the things we could do is we could exchange some of those water rights and build infrastructure that came off the Sacramento River, so that if we had drought in one system or the other, we'd have some flexibility. And then building that infrastructure would allow us to tie a number of regional systems together, some of which are still 100% groundwater. And then you can use the surface water in wet years to turn off the groundwater supply, so that in dry years you've got more groundwater available and you can reduce your overall demand on the surface water supply. And then there's a need for some ecosystem infrastructure. The temperature control device on Folsom Reservoir leaks like a sieve, and it's very coarse and does not do a good job. And so they over-release the amount of cold water that's necessary in order to meet their objectives. And cold water released out of Folsom Reservoir is the whole game. And then the last piece is water recycling.
Okay, well, specifically for there's drought.ca.gov, which is information about the drought and work that the state is doing and all the local agencies that are actively involved. The Association of California Water Agencies, aqua.org, is also doing a lot to try to identify where there are issues with water systems and water storage and water supply. So if you want to find out about the status of that in your region as well as statewide, they have a lot of information.
Paul, what was that website? Sorry to interrupt.
Aqua.org.
ACWA,
sorry, acwa.org. For the Bay Delta Conservation Plan, baydeltaconservationplan.org is the website that has everything on it that you might want to look at, from the plan to the environmental impact reports, summary documents, all kinds of information. So check it out there. In terms of participation on the Bay Delta Conservation Plan, the public comment period is open right now on the environmental impact report. And so if you have some comments you'd like to provide, including what's Plan B, please feel free to do so. And so there will be responses to comments that we have. We'll probably have a couple of public hearings as well, which will be published or publicized on the website. And then in terms of actions on the elements of the Bay Delta Conservation Plan, one of the components has to do with the ecosystem restoration and the funding for that. So if you read the plan, or if you look at the bond measures that are being proposed, you know that there's elements there associated with providing funding for the ecosystem restoration element. So that will be up for public vote. One of the bond measures is on the ballot this year. There's a lot of work on the legislature's part to refine that ballot measure. So you'll get your chance to vote on that, which covers not just DDCP and the habitat restoration part, but other water investments. So that's a long-winded way of getting to my closing statement, which is, I think that we've heard perspectives here about what the needs are locally as well as statewide. Even though Einar and I have had many opportunities to go talk to groups, I think our views are pretty convergent. We acknowledge that climate change is going to be a challenge for all of us in the state, not just for people that are taking water out of the Delta, but for anybody that lives in California. And we have to address that. We have to address what kind of balance are we going to strike between, as Joe suggested, some of the ecosystem characteristics that we've had in California in the past versus the 34 million people that live in the state now. And some of that has to do with water conveyance through the Delta, some of it has to do with what are the standards we have to meet in the Delta and how do we make sure that we have up-to-date standards in the future. So it's a challenge that we're all involved in, and I look forward to working closely with Einar and the other folks in the North State Alliance to make sure that whatever we look at in terms of water quality requirements in the future incorporates all of those different aspects of climate change and balancing all the different uses.
Thanks. You know, we have a drought, and the fact is it's transitory, but if you go on our website, pcwa.net, you can find information about it. But the real issue before us is the Bay Delta Conservation Plan. It proposes to fundamentally change the equation of California water in a way that's going to affect, I think, all of our lives for multiple generations. And we're doing as much as we can to try to get word out. This session is being recorded, and we're going to post it on our website. We sponsored this event because we want people to know what's going on. And our fundamental message is the only difference between Paul and I is the order, right? We believe that we need to have an operating plan for this system that we can all agree to, that's going to incorporate those regulatory changes in the Delta that deal with very difficult issues of climate change and rising sea level in a way that doesn't put our region out of water and keep Southern California in water. I mean, our interests need to be protected first, or also. And that there's a governance structure that we can rely on to implement that agreement in the long term. And there's years, I think, between now and seeing that done. We're putting no small amount of water, or resources, money, into evaluating the existing EIR that's been put out. 34,000-page environmental document. And we are combining legal resources with the rest of the North State to try to bring this project to a halt until we get an operating plan worked out and a governance structure that works for us. So Paul and I agree that this isn't a bad project. It's just a matter of how you put it together.
So in terms of resources, two that I would recommend, and just you can Google either. Spare Sac Water is the city's website, but there's plenty of resources that connect you to water conservation tools and tips. Also connects to, for instance, UC Davis, if you're interested in landscaping ideas and drought-tolerant landscaping. And then the other, more importantly for the region, is the Regional Water Authority, which I mentioned earlier. Again, a great resource in terms of education, outreach messages, and a wealth of information in terms of our water supply and how we can all manage our water resources. And so with that said, my closing message is pretty simplistic, and that is, as we talked about this policy, we talked about the Bay Delta plan and other things, remember that this is all demand driven. And so this is about demand. And I say that to mean that it is Earth Day, Earth Week. And so let's not forget that we play a very significant role in terms of what we've talked about today, in terms of driving that demand. And that simple changes really can be the start of new solutions. So we talked about the environment, what's the best plan? And I'm not suggesting that just by going home and taking a quicker shower or cutting your daughter's hair is going to solve the problem. But I do want to make sure that we all recognize that this is just a supply and demand issue and that we are all the demand. So make sure we remember that this Earth Week. Thanks.
So the resource that I'd want to draw your attention to is the North State Water Alliance. It's the organization that Einar mentioned. It's an organization that's existed for a couple of years. It includes the Sacramento Metro Chamber of Commerce, so the largest business organization. It also includes the Regional Water Authority. It includes the North State Water Association, so the water associations going up to Central Valley. It also includes the Mountain Valley Water Resources Association, so those in the Sierras. And it includes the Sacramento Area Council of Governments, so the 28 cities and counties that make up the 6-county metro area. It has organizations including cities and counties and water agencies like the Placer County Water Agency. And it's providing a forum where the public and private sector can talk about these very important issues and make sure that from a North State perspective, that as we seek a statewide solution to our water, that it's done in a way that sort of represents and protects North State interests, because we have an interest not only from a standpoint of meeting urban and agricultural interests, but also environmental interests, because we all live and work here, and we need to make sure that there are the sort of environmental flows that are coming down the American and Sacramento rivers, supporting habitat, supporting the quality of life that we have in the greater Sacramento area. So I would encourage you to check out the North State Water Alliance. There's going to be even more information supplied on it in the coming weeks and months about the Bay Delta Conservation Plan and how you can weigh in. And my parting 2 cents is that beyond the 5 priorities that I was able to lay out for you, I think it's very important to take to heart what Terrance just said, which is we are the answer. It's not someone else. It's not necessarily a state or a federal agency or a regulatory body. It really is us. It's the way that we use water. It's the way that we work together. It is how enterprising we are about conserving water, reclaiming water. This is, after all, the state of California. It's the place where literally the new or next economy is being created. And so if we can take into account and be enterprising and innovative, there's nothing that can't stop us, but it really has to start with each and every one of us to think creatively, to act responsibly, and to work collaboratively towards an end that serves everybody in the state, both south, but especially in the north.
I agree to everything that they all said.
That was going to be my wrap-up statement.
Okay, good. Well, I'm pleased to be here and associated with this group of people who I think are pretty much on the same page in a lot of situations. I think that if you were to look for organizations that would like to have you really dig deep into this Bay Delta Conservation Plan, all you have to do is go on the web. You can restore the Delta as one site. Friends of the River has a considerable amount of information. Natural Resources Defense Council, no, I'm sorry, it's Environmental Defense, has a great deal about it. This is a contentious issue in terms of once again, just trying to figure out how to get more of Northern California's water to Southern California. And there are many big questions, especially about the environmental aspects of it. We, as I've said so many times before, we are a resource-based species. We, like all other species out there, depend 100% on our environment. And we have figured out now that there are enough of us, and our types of technology and so on have gotten us into very serious trouble. It's not just our numbers, there's plenty of us, but it's also the level of affluence that we achieve. And so when you multiply those three things together in what we call the triple bottom line, if you don't have a sustainable society, a sustainable economy, and a sustainable environment, you can't really have sustainability. So it takes a lot of discussion and a lot of working together and a lot of conversation about conservation. Right? I got that right. And talking a lot more about it. And should there not be some sacrifice? And we don't like to talk about sacrifice in California. And I think that that's part of this equation. We need to consider what we're going to give up. It's always amazed me that as you fly over Placer County in August, it's green. And what's it doing green? When this is a Mediterranean climate and this is the height of our drought period and so on. Water transfers and pastures that are unnecessary and what I call llama land and things like this. What are we doing with our water? We're horrific water wasters, and we're not good stewards of our environment. At least we haven't been. We're creeping our way back, and this gives us an opportunity to really look closely. When I mentioned the Delta and the teeming wildlife that was once there, it's not that long ago that we altered that. And I'd like to see that type of thing happen again. I'd like to see a commercial salmon fishery back in California again, a very serious one. And it's all about water. And I have two grandsons now, and a grandchildren that are very important to us. And their future is not just a nice home over their head, a roof over their head, clean water to drink, and healthy, preferably local food to eat, but it's also clean fish to catch and clean rivers to hike along and beaches and so on. And this is clearly what all of our features include. And once again, I reiterate that I want to see the environment brought right back up to the very top of the list. Nature has batted last for way too long. And especially all of us gray hairs out here, it takes us about this long to finally realize that we've got some corrections to make. So I do also wish you an Earth Day, wish it were Earth Year and so on. And I thank everyone for joining us today as well. Thank you for coming.